Have you ever wanted to do this to your Yu-Gi-Oh opponent?
Draw! Monster card! Draw! Monster card! Draw! Monster card! Draw! Monster card!
Well, fear not, because Master Duel's latest festival gives you an opportunity to maybe pull this card off. Get ready to draw Monster Cardo right after this. So I'm going to start by recapping exactly what Berserker Soul does. So you can activate this card when you've inflicted 1500 or less life point damage with a direct attack. And once you've done that, you can discard your hand for the opportunity to excavate cards from the top of your deck. And if you excavate a monster card, you can inflict 500 points of damage and then go for the next card. And you can do this up to 8 times. Now, the main problems with this, among many others, is firstly the card isn't very searchable. Being a quick play spell, there are very few cards in the game that allow you to search Berserker Soul and add it to your hand. And even things like Left Arm Offering, which can do that, then leave you without the necessary hand to discard to activate the effect. The second problem with this card is that it requires you to be playing a very monster-heavy deck. And so your things like your deck thinners and all of your spell searches, they're all going to get away from you being able to use this card optimally. But of course, the more monsters you run, the less access you're going to get to this card, and ultimately, in most decks, the less functional they're going to be. So you're not going to even be in the position to win. What we're really after, when using this card, is a monster that can preferably protect itself, which can attack directly for small chip damage, so that then you can play it as many times as you want. And that leads us to Lyrilusc, an archetype of winged beast monsters, which includes in their repertoire the monster Assembled Nightingale. Assembled Nightingale can be made up of any amount of level 1 materials, and it can attack your opponent directly for every material that it has. And by giving up a material, it also prevents itself and all of your other Lyrilusc monsters from being destroyed by card effects, by battle, and it prevents any life point loss through battle damage. So the plan is very simple. You get your opponent's life points down below 4,000, you attack directly with the Assembled Nightingale, and you play Berserker Soul and hope that all you're going to pick up are your Lyrilusc monsters. Let's get into a replay. So this duel is really going to exemplify everything this deck is about. To go second deck, and we've drawn into one of our board breakers in this weaker Kaiju monster. We've drawn into Berserker Soul, obviously that's very fortunate, and we've drawn into some Lyriluscs as well. So this is really your ideal setup. Now, in the festival, we're basically playing a go second deck, and we don't have much interruptions in terms of our opponent using hand traps. So really it's all about what cards do they have on the field? Can they prevent us doing what they're doing? And in this instance, we're able to remove their main threat, their Synchro Monster, with this Kaiju. And from here on in, it's about, can we get the Lyriluscs on the field? And what you're trying to do is get pairs of Lyrilusc monsters so that you're able to go into your extra deck to search for the extenders, or to get rid of threats on the board. And your main option isn't going to be Nightingale from the bat, it's going to be going into Recycled Starling. This is one of the this is the only ultra rare in the deck that's mandatory except for Berserker Soul. Ideally, you would have at least 2 in there. You can run this with 1, and we'll see why that's a problem in just a second. It has 3 effects, and we need all of them for our combo to work. The first one is to raise the attack of a monster on the field when it's summoned, and in this instance we're going to go for the Kaiju. and we're then able to get rid of a material to search for a level 1 winged beast. But the opponent chains imperm to it, so that effect's going to be negated, as well as the third effect, which I'll get into in a little bit. But no matter, because we used the Wagtail as a special summon in the earlier part of this combo, we've been able to search for Lyrilusc Birdcall, and that lets us search our deck for another monster. And because we have the Sapphire Sparrow, sorry, the Sapphire Swallow as well as the Cobalt Sparrow, we can special summon them both, and that gives us another free search for Beryl Canary. So we can go into our second copy here of Starling, and that lets us search for another level 1 winged beast, plus give that power up to the Kaiju. Now, if you had a third copy of Recital Starling, you could actually go into that from here as well, either using the Beryl, actually immediately using the Beryl Canary. But what we're going to do instead is go for a 3-material assembled Nightingale, and we're in the position to do this because we've got Berserker Soul in hand. Now, because one of those materials is the Sapphire Swallow, we're able to add an extra material to it from our graveyard. And the assembled Nightingale attacks for as many times as the material that it has. So you are trying to maximize on the material, and it gets 200 attack also if any of those material are Beryl Canary. What we can do is use its effect so that once per turn we can detach a material to prevent our Lyrilusc monsters from being destroyed by battle, and also prevent us from taking battle damage. And this is vital because this third effect of Recital Starling is that the opponent will also take battle damage from attacks involving this card. So now our life points protected and our Recital Starling won't be destroyed, but our opponent's life points will be affected if we ram this into attacking monsters, which is why you're trying to increase the attack of your opponent's monsters. Now for this first version, obviously Imperm's negated this effect, so actually nobody takes any damage and the monsters still aren't destroyed. But the second one is going to inflict that 3,400. We're then going to take these 4 engagements here, 1,000 damage each time, so the opponent's going to go down to 600 life points. And I'll just swivel over here so that we can see when I use Berserker Soul, we get off 1 monster and then 2 monsters to win the game with 500 life points apiece. So we've got a very similar setup here, and in this instance we don't have Kaiju, but the opponent doesn't quite make the board. I think they have the capacity to, and so we're able to, in this instance, kind of sweep the opponent for game. So I'm just going to let this kind of replay play out and talk to you about some of the other Lyrilusc monsters. We saw in the last duel, Celestine Wagtail. So yeah, when you special summon this, it lets you search for a spell or trap card. So it's really good to try and get it off with some of your special summon effects. So Turquoise Warbler is a good one if you control no monsters, and then Beryl Canary is really often your other option. Get it into the graveyard and then special summon it back. Now in this instance, the attack boost effect of Recital Starling is negated by the Freezing Chains card. One other card to mention is this honorary Lyrilusc monster, the Simorgh Bird of the Beginning, and if you normal summon it, you can get an additional normal summon of Simorgh. So in effect, with these 2 in hand, we're able to get off one of our Lyrilusc Xyz monsters. Plus, if your opponent actually has no back row, you're also able to special summon one back into defense position. So that's another interesting way of just extending your turn potentially in your opponent's turn. So here I go for Promenade Thrush. It's super rare and it lets you basically bounce a spell or trap card that's in the back. So here maybe I think they're running whatever it's called, that Icy Chains trap card, which affects you in the battle phase. I don't really want to see that, so I'm just going to bounce that card straight away. And that means that we're now able to go into our Beryl Canary and go into, once again, a 3-material assembled Nightingale. And you've seen this thing before, where essentially I bounce off the Wagtail to prevent my monsters being destroyed. We'll ram in. This time, obviously, we've only got a tiny bit of attack, but we're able to detach a material from the Promenade Thrush to increase the attack of the Nightingale. And that puts us into a decent position with Berserker Soul. And again, we need just 2 cards in order to win the game. And that's kind of typical, I'd say, for this deck. You don't want to be relying on 5, 6, or 7 to win with Berserker Soul, but 2, I think you got a good chance. So we're going to play a different deck here. It's going to be one of the kind of fish goatee decks. And the important thing to know with this, if you've played the festival, I'm sure you're aware, is that they're going to try and synchro summon on their turn to disrupt your plays. And in this instance, because they've got a level 2 on the field as well as a level 6, the monster we've got to be aware of is White Aura Whale. And that's going to destroy all of your monsters as soon as they're in the field if they're in attack position. And so different ways of combating this. Obviously with this deck you can quite readily special summon from the extra deck in defense mode, but then you're not going to be able to inflict damage in that particular battle phase. And so what I do instead is actually go into the assembled Nightingale first rather than the recycled Starling, and I can do that because of the amount of Lyriluscs I've got in the hand. So here we see assembled Nightingale. They're going to try and imperm it, and I'm then able to chain on the imperm this detach effect. So that's really good for us. Obviously, it's not brilliant to have this effect negated, but the effect is now live, so none of our Lyrilusc monsters can be destroyed, and we're able to go into our extenders. So by showing a level 1 wing beast in my hand, I'm able to special summon the pair of them and get off a free recruiter into my hand. And so now we'll go into the Starlings. I'll be able to get another Lyrilusc to my hand. Perhaps it would have been pertinent to have actually gone into two symbol bird at the beginning. But what does it matter? Here I go into a first one, or actually we're going to go into another one later on down the line. So here they're like, okay, 4 attack position monsters, we're going to go for the White Aura Whale. But of course, all of my Lyrilusc monsters are protected, and so they get absolutely no value out of that whatsoever. And so here I go into a 3 material assembled Nightingale, attack them for 2,800 damage, and then I'll be able to get 3 attacks off for 800 damage, plus we'll go into the Berserker Soul. They're at 2,800 life points, so this is doable, but not probable. And we draw 1, 2, 3, and then the next card is Droplet. So we're not able to complete game with that, but we have got ourselves into a good position. Now they're able to do some shenanigans with their graveyard, but obviously with now 2 Nightingales on the field, we're able to use different materials. It was actually a bit unclear as to which one. I kind of wanted to use this one, but ho-hum, it doesn't matter. They don't try and attack me, because it wouldn't have any effect, but obviously I've drawn Droplet. And that's the interesting thing about Berserker Soul, which you wouldn't know if you ever played it, is that the cards remain where they are. And so we knew we were drawing into that, and that means we're really in a good position to negate their capacity to synchro summon on my turn, because they've only got 1 tuner on the field, but obviously if they had more, I'd simply tribute more monsters. And so really, I'm kind of just waiting for the right moment to use Droplet. They could obviously go into the goatee of the Deep Beyond at any point, but obviously when I've got the power to use extenders, then they're not going to want to do it prematurely, leave their field open for an attack. But here I can use Droplet, get rid of the Beryl Canary, target their Schiff, and they immediately call game from there, knowing that it's over. So I'm going to include this replay because it's honestly one of my favourite final turns I've seen in a long time, and I think it's well worth showing others. So we're in this situation with the deck. We're playing one of those burn decks where they're not playing any monsters, they're just stalling for time and using kind of burn trap cards. Things like this Skull Invitation, so every time a card goes into the grave, for either player, they take 300 damage. And then also Coffin Seller, for every monster that goes to my graveyard, I take 300 damage. And this deck's quite heavy on that, as you'll see in this upcoming turn. I've got 6,500 life points, my opponent has 4,500. I'm able to go into some XE summons, and in this instance I go into Promenade Thrush because I want to bounce one of the back row. I suspect, given how this duel's gone, that it's going to either be something like, some kind of burn trap, essentially. And the more I can get rid of those, the better this will be. And I don't deem these much of a threat at this point in time, the Skull Invitation or the Coffin Cellar, and history might tell me that that was a wrong decision. So for this first attack that comes in the battle phase, this 1000 attack Promenade Thrush, I get Dimension Ward, so that hits me for 1000 damage. They take 300 because a card's gone to the graveyard. The first Assembled Nightingale hits for 400, and then the second one tries to go in but gets Magic Cylinders. And here I detach a material because I'm not quite sure actually why, but I do it anyway, and that costs me 300 critical life points of damage. I get Magic Cylinders for 800, they take 300 damage, but of course I take an additional 300 because I've given up a monster with that material. And here I give up another monster, so another 600 material, so that I can attack again with the Assembled Nightingale. And it's at this moment that I play Berserker Soul. So I just want to get this situation outlined. I'm going to take 600 damage for every monster that I send to the graveyard, and I've got 2,900 life points. My opponent is on 2,400 life points, so if I reveal 5 monsters in a row, I will win before these effects take place. So that's the gamble that I've taken. Let's see how it plays out. So I discard my card for the Kaiju, and again, that's important. That puts me onto 2,600. 1, 2, 3, 4. Berserker Soul. And so the opponent stays on 400 life points, and now I have to deal with the ramifications of that. So with 4 monsters going to the graveyard, I'm going to take 2,400 points of damage from the monsters, and that's key. So I'm going to take here 300 for each monster, and then Berserker Soul goes to the graveyard, and so I'm going to take another 300 points of damage, plus then 300 each for the 4 monsters, and I'm on 1,100 life points. And so with this chain 5 of Coffin Cellar, I actually lose this duel. And obviously, I probably didn't need to go into Berserker Soul there, but wow, what a final turn that was. Okay, so this is the all-important deck list that we settled on. And I think one of the things that you might see initially is that we're actually running a lot more spell cards than you might expect from a traditional Berserker Soul deck, if that even is a thing. And there's a bunch of reasons for this. The main one being that essentially the monster cards you'd be running in replacement of those spell cards simply don't do enough to justify them being in there. We've still got a high odds of hitting 1 or 2 monsters in a row with Berserker Soul. And more often than not, that's all you're going to need to do. Once you get to maybe 4 or 5, then you're likely to run into a spell card. But with the ratios that are like this, 1 or 2, and that is, as I say, often you're going to be hitting 2 Starling into a 3,000 odd attack monster, and then you're going to get 1 or 2 attacks off, and then going into Berserker Soul. And so it's not necessary to go into a big 4,000 attack and just to fill this deck up. Because there aren't that many level 1, in particular, extenders that are water and wind attribute. If you're playing this in the main format, by all means, look at things like Jester Confit, look at Mystic Piper, look at all these kind of creatures, see how they'd get along. In that instance, then maybe I'd suggest going for less spells in this deck, maybe 5 or 6. But for the format, I think actually this ratio works quite well. We're running, I'd say, a split between draw cards and board breakers in terms of our spell lineup, and obviously the draw cards help us be a bit more efficient in searching for that Berserker Soul, because, you know, we want to use the card, that's the point of the deck. And then the board breakers are really there, obviously, to facilitate our going second, and Droplet is the favoured breaker, I think, for that festival for this deck. And that's mainly because of the monsters that the Ice Barrier deck put on the field. And we saw it work well with the Goatee deck as well. Essentially, you can either cripple their tuner, or you can cripple that synchro that lets them special summon from the deck. And obviously, once many Ice Barrier players cottoned on, they were special summoning out their monster, which meant that your opponent has to discard a card for their on-field monster effects, and that's really crippling for the Lyrilusc effect. So if you can nip that in the bud early with Droplet or a Kaiju, we're running 8, so there's a decent chance of that happening with all of our starting hands, then we're doing quite well. And hopefully you can then push the game from there. Now, it looks quite expensive, this deck, I'd say, but quite a few of the cards it's not necessary to have. Certainly, I think the Ensemble Robin and the Bird of Serenity are purely in here because I have them, rather than them being exceptionally useful. They are very, very, very marginal gains, to the point where I've not really seen it in the 70 or 80 duels I did in this festival. I do recommend, obviously, 2 Recital Starling, but some decks of 3. I hope you've enjoyed this this upload for Master Duel, and we can potentially look to doing more on the channel going forward. I'm not sure what the next deck's going to be, but hopefully I'll see you there for it.